Well, hello again. So here we are back at this slide that we left off the last one with, the part one of we're in chapter 4, now we're in part 2. We left off with this slide in part 1. A couple of other things about this polarity. It affects what the function is at each aspect of this individual cell. So the apical function not only opens to the outside world or the lumen, it's also the portion that secretes or absorbs or breaks off when we think of some of the glandular functions that we'll talk about in portions that come up. So that portion of an individual cell, the apical portion, has a different function within the cell than the basolateral portion. Basolateral portion is where you're going to find more of the organelles. So you're going to find more of the mitochondria, more of the Golgi apparatus, more of the endoplasmic reticulum, etc. And that's where the nucleus is going to be focused in the basolateral area because of the aspect of the apical portion has that secretion or absorption function. And then the basolateral surface will attach to deeper tissue via this this structure we call the basement membrane. So the basal lamina, which I pretty consistently call the basement membrane because that's the way it was instructed to me initially. What happens is that basement membrane is a combination of the bottom surface or the basement surface of that epithelial cell, the membrane, and its connection to the deeper tissue via what would be connective tissue fiber, excuse me. And so you have the cells of the bottom of this epithelial cell, or the basement of the epithelial cell, are actually different than the cells of the apical surface. The ones that make up the basement membrane have a protein structure that is tighter than the apical surface. That protein structure of the membrane that makes up the basal surface, and also the lateral surface to a certain extent, are glycoproteins that make sure that no proteins leave this cell via that surface, via the basal surface. And also on the lateral aspect, you have these junctions, which we will talk about. And the membrane on the lateral aspect has the capacity to have certain areas among the plasma membrane that form the connections or the attachments cell to cell. The apical surface has another little piece that can be different about it. Things can be inserted and taken out because remember, the apical surface is what dictates the permeability of this cell. So you'll have a cell that can be impermeable, become semi-permeable, or freely permeable because proteins can be inserted into the cell membrane to create that permeability. And those proteins can be inserted into the cell membrane to create that permeability off and on. This can be a function of the nervous system telling the cell, we want you to put these proteins in, these protein channels in, to affect the permeability of you as a cell. Very, very interesting aspect of epithelial cells. A little bit more, the microvilli increase the surface area exponentially. So wherever you have absorption or secretion going on, generally you'll have microvilli to increase the capacity of that absorption and secretion. And with regard to cilia can, we talked about that a little bit in the respiratory tract and reproductive tract. And cilia you can have on an individual cell's apical surface, you can have as many as 250 cilia. And what happens is they all beat in unison. They all basically beat together, I guess, not necessarily in unison. It's more of like a wave. If you remember the wave, I'm really dating myself. I don't know if the wave is really done anymore. And that's unique aspects of certain types of epithelial cells. Not all epithelial cells have microvilli, nor do all epithelial cells have cilia. Those are put in certain areas where they can perform an excellent function for the body. Characteristics of the epithelial cell, you have this concept of cellularity. And what that means, and you would think all tissue is made up of cells, has cellularity, but epithelial cells are unique in this particular aspect because epithelial cells have certain types of junctions or connections between the two. And I'm trying not to use that word connection because we actually use that with one of the types of junctions. But attachments between the cells can be unique to allow a specific function. And what I mean by that is a connection between two cells can create a pore between in the basolateral surface. And understand these are junctions that are inserted in the basolateral surface, and particularly the lateral aspect of the epithelial cell that allows a pore that allows something to pass, generally ions to pass from cell to cell. And these are usually very specialized junctions, specialized connections, pores, where maybe a sodium ion will pass through. And you think of that when you think of how a cardiovascular, how the muscle tissue of the heart beats synchronistically, how that lub-dub or that beat of the heart is managed synchronistically from muscle cell to muscle cell to muscle cell. So these junctions, which we will talk about right after this particular slide, if we ever get off of it, sorry, I'm just kidding, gives these epithelial cells their unique function from one type of cell to the other. They have these attachments. We talked about the basement membrane a little bit already, but the basement membrane a little bit more. That basement membrane gives this epithelial cell a little bit more strength and structure, because most of the time when you're going to have a secretion absorption, you have something that's one cell thick. And we didn't mention it, I guess, in the first one, but your book mentions how small a cell is. You've looked at cells in your microscope, hopefully, and you see that they're very small. So something that small can't be particularly strong enough to stand up to hydrochloric acid in the stomach, or strong enough to stand up to toxins that can be delivered. But this basement membrane makes it a little bit stronger. Epithelial cells are what's known as avascular, so they don't have blood flow to them. What happens is nutrients get into these cells via diffusion, and that diffusion can be through the apical surface, or you actually, sometimes the diffusion can be through the basement membrane surface. And what that is, the way that happens is it actually has to go between the connective tissue and then the cells, or the area or the compounds that make up the baso surface of that particular epithelial cell. So you have they are living tissue, so they are constantly in need of nutrients and constantly in need of getting rid of waste products, and that happens via diffusion, but not via blood flow coming to them. And the reason that's the case, and kind of important to understand in terms of the body, is you find these in places where you don't want, they're walling off. Remember, part of their job is protective. They're walling off an area from the rest of the body, or they're walling off an area from a particular substance staying in there until it's ready to go into the bloodstream. I'm thinking of the GI tract because that's lined with epithelial cells. You want to keep the chyme or bolus or the partially digested food in a certain portion of the GI tract until that partially digested food becomes something that the body recognizes as, say, carbohydrates, proteins, or fats, and then can be absorbed into the blood. So the permeability can shift, but you also have the need to make sure that these things don't move out of the GI tract until they're a particular compound that the body can recognize. And then this regeneration, I think hopefully I've made you understand that these are pretty hard-working cells, and they're usually one cell thick. They don't have blood flow through to them, but what they do is they do have a high rate of cell turnover, and so they are able to replace themselves. They do this via stem cells. So you have stem cells that are constantly churning out epithelial cells, and those epithelial cells are going to replace ones that are being injured or wearing out or no longer able to adequately perform their function. Those are all characteristics of epithelial. Now onto the types of junctions, and we'll probably finish up this particular part and then pick up again with the next part with these junctions. Starting at the top, and again, my recommendation for you is that you listen to me, you read the outlines, or you have the outlines, but you also read portions of the book or the entire book if you love the book as much as I do, to understand things that get into a little bit more detail, and these junctions might be where you need to read the book. The first type of junction is called a gap junction, and this is the one where you have the connections, and these are considered connections with the X in it. Same word pronunciation, but different spelling, different concept. And what you have are embedded in the lateral surface these proteins that create a tube. So they're a arrangement of 6 tubular type proteins that create a pore, and that allows for free diffusion, particularly, and this is a very, very small pore, so free diffusion of ions and very small molecules. And the reason we say that small molecule idea is that proteins, large protein molecules, remember those, that's the structure of the protein, they're very large comparatively compared to ions, would not get through. So it is considered selectively allowing for free diffusion, and these are in cells where, as I said before, like the muscle cells of the heart, which allows sodium ions to go through. And then in the next one over, so that would be B, I guess, and A is showing you all of them. The one in the center of this cell junction is showing you all of them. So the center of the 4 is showing you all, and all of these junctions don't exist in one particular cell. You have types of junctions depending on where you find this epithelial cell. With regard to tight junctions, which is, I guess, the letter C, and we're all the way over to the top right, tight junctions aren't even going to allow water to flow. So tight junctions are just like they say, they're very, very close together, and fusion of the 2 outer layers of the membrane. And I am going to leave it at that and pick it up again because I'm running out of time. See you in part 3.